Hello again and welcome to Astronomy Toronto. My name is Randy Attwood. Astronomy Toronto is produced by the Toronto Centre of the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada and is an astronomical news magazine where we look at both amateur and professional astronomers and what they're doing. Today we're up in Richmond Hill at the David Dunlap Observatory, where we'll be looking at Canada's largest telescope. That is the 74-inch telescope, the largest telescope Canada has on its soil. You must remember that Canada has a new telescope in Hawaii. And our guest today is Doug Gies, who spent July at the telescope in Hawaii and also works here at the DDO. So he's here to give us a bit of a tour. Doug, thanks very much for coming today.
My pleasure indeed, Randy.
First, could we maybe start talking about the history of the DDO?
Yeah, this telescope goes way far back. We're nearing our 50th anniversary now. The telescope got started in the 1930s. It was the gift of Mrs. Jessie Donalda Dunlap to the University of Toronto, which just had a fledgling Department of Astronomy back in 1933, and came into operation a few years later, and it's been going ever since. Every clear night of the year, except for Christmas night and New Year's Eve, the telescope will be in use. Someone will be using it to make some sort of observations of the night sky.
Well, behind us we can see the large dome itself, and beside us is the administration building. What is in it?
Well, the administration building is our place for offices. We have Canada's actually the largest library for astronomical books in Canada, and in the basement we have computers, shops, other things for taking a look closely at our observations that we get with the telescopes. In fact, that might be a good place to start looking around the observatory, since this is sort of a daytime haven for astronomers to come up from the University of Toronto and have a quiet place to visit. That might be a cool spot for us to get started as well on our tour today.
All right, let's go. Well, here we are in the library, Doug. I guess this is where all the astronomers would do some studying and catch up on the latest publications.
That's right, Randy. This is actually the finest astronomical library in Canada. We have many volumes of books, and more importantly, we have many reports coming from other observatories and magazines, journals coming in. And astronomers at the University of Toronto have such a wide variety of interests. Not only do they use the telescope here, but many use large optical telescopes in other places in the world. We have, as you mentioned, the new Canadian telescope in Hawaii. There's one in South America that the University of Toronto runs in Chile. And as well, other astronomers would use radio telescopes, for instance, ones in southern United States, Puerto Rico, and even as far away as Europe. So there's a lot of interest, and astronomy nowadays is something which is very active and very vibrant. So much information coming up on all different types of things in astronomy all the time. Just for instance, this magazine over here is the Astrophysical Journal. This is sort of like Maclean's magazine for the astronomer.
Mm-hmm.
And this comes out every 2 weeks, and as you can see, it's
rather thick for every 2 weeks.
It's quite a lengthy publication. This one runs, let's see, 350 pages, and it's just to keep up and understand what new discoveries are always coming about in astronomy.
So this would be published. This would be published by astronomers from all over the world.
That's right. Astronomers from many different countries would publish the results of their research, and especially nowadays with results from new satellites and from new telescopes, the types of discoveries and the information that we're getting about the universe is just exploding. Mm-hmm. And it's one of the first things an astronomer would do, as well as doing his own research, is to keep in touch with what all the other interesting things are going on with his colleagues around the world.
Super.
So this is part of the daytime activity. Of course, the real crux of it for some of us is the nighttime of activity using the telescopes. So maybe next we might go upstairs and take a look at some of the telescopes on top of this building.
All right, we'll go upstairs then.
Thanks.
This is the first telescope we're going to look at, and you can probably hear the echo because we're inside of one of the large domes up on top of the administration building. This is the 6-inch Cook telescope.
That's right, Randy. This is in fact the oldest of the telescopes we'll see looking around today. This one is quite a historical telescope. It was one of the earliest telescopes to come to Toronto, and it came over from England, from Thomas Cook, who were the makers in London, in the 1870s. And the reason was they wanted to view the transit of Venus. In fact, there were two that were occurring quite close together. And the transit of Venus is the event that you see when Venus, which is the planet closer to the sun than we are, passes in front of the face of the sun. And at that time, astronomers were really interested in finding out this, because if they could make exact timings, they were able, through geometry, to work out what the distance was between the Earth and the sun, which which people didn't know very well at that point, were quite interested in.
And a transit of Venus doesn't happen that often.
No, I think it's only a few times a century. So it was quite an event.
Well, we don't even get one this century. I think the next one's just after the year 2000, isn't
Really?
it?
So it was quite an event, and in fact, the British scientists sent telescopes all around the world to South America, to the South Pacific, many places, hoping to get observations from several different places of this event. Well, apparently they sent 2 to Toronto. One was downtown, which was this one, right in the location where the University of Toronto downtown is now. And the other one was sent north of Toronto, I think up to Markham or Newmarket, somewhere north of the city. Well, the story goes the day arrived, and it was cloudy downtown.
Oh, no.
So they never observed it with this one. But north of the city, where the other telescope was, which was apparently a sister to this one, it was clear, and so they were able to get some observations, and good observations as far as I understand. But
Well, it looks like it's in pretty good shape for 110 years.
telescopes last a long time, and this one has done very well. I myself have had some of my best views of the planets and the moon through this telescope. Despite its old age, it's got superb optics, and on a good night you can see the rings around Saturn and the bands on Jupiter with just tremendous clarity. And one of the ideal features of this telescope is that if the power ever goes off in this area, it doesn't happen too often, but all the other telescopes will be stocked because their motors are electric. The motor on this one is quite interesting. It's gravity driven. You might want to come around and have a look. It's quite an interesting thing to see.
Okay, let's go around. Oh, I see what you mean. It's like an old grandfather clock.
Yeah, exactly. This device is the clock drive, and what it does, it drives the telescope slowly across the sky, just in the same way as the sun rises in the east, moves across the sky, and sets in the west. The stars also move across the sky, just being the fact that the Earth is turning on its axis. And this device is tuned precisely to the same rate of rotation as the Earth's turning, so that by setting up the telescope on a star, starting this motor will drive the telescope slowly across the sky and keep the star in view for the whole time that you want to look at it, which is very helpful. And as you can see, the motion is very tiny. It starts from this flywheel, down through this gear, connects up along this rod, and you can see maybe that it's a very slow, fine motion. But you really do notice it when you look through the telescope, because with this telescope you can observe at quite a high magnification. And when you magnify your image, you're also magnifying the Earth's motion. And so it's very important to be able to track well. This telescope is a 6-inch telescope. At the very top of it is a 6-inch lens, very finely ground. And it focuses the image down to the bottom of the telescope, where we have a number of small eyepieces that we can fit in to view at different magnifications.
Okay, Doug, here we are standing in front of the 19-inch telescope. And you say somebody made this, homemade?
That's right, Randy. This is hand-built by R.K. Young, who was one of the first directors of the observatory. I've seen pictures of this telescope back when it was exhibited at the CNE back in the 1920s. It was really an early telescope. But he built this himself entirely, the optics for it, the mounting, all the metalwork, and recently, as you can see, we've got some spaghetti electronics tied into it as well. That's a more recent addition, but the telescope basically comes from his time.
And this is it has a mirror in it rather than a lens, right?
Right. This is a reflecting telescope, and it's like the big one we'll see in just a moment, the 74-inch telescope. This one collects the light instead of using a lens, using a mirror. And the mirror in this case is right down here at the bottom of the telescope. In fact, I'll just tip the telescope back a bit and we can have a closer look at the mirror.
Okay.
This mirror is 19 inches across, and when you see it, you'll see that it's not completely flat, that there's a slight distortion to it. Well, this is 19 inches across. That's why we call it the 19-inch telescope. And the way it works, this is the bottom of the tube here. Light from stars will come down the tube, hit this main mirror, which is slightly deeper in the center than it is at the edges. Slightly concave in shape, as we say. So that when light from the star comes down and hits this mirror, the mirror will come back up in a cone shape, sort of like a dunce's cap, rather than going straight back up to the star. And before that peak of the cone is reached, though, there's another smaller mirror, which we can't see from here, but it's up at the top of the telescope. And that smaller mirror reflects light straight back down the tube again. Now, it wouldn't be in any luck if it came and hit the mirror directly, but as you can see, maybe right here in the very center is a hole. And so the light will go straight through the hole in the center of the mirror and go back down to the bottom of the telescope. And that's where we look in, right down at the bottom of the scope. It's what astronomers call a Cassegrain system. Cassegrain being the original person who designed this mirror reflecting system.
Well, I don't see an eyepiece at the bottom there now.
Yeah, at the bottom of the scope now we've got a special type of electronic device on here, and this is used extensively. It's called a photoelectric photometer, and really what it is, it's just like a light meter inside your Instamatic camera. This is it down here, and what it does is it allows you to take a close look at a star and find out very precisely how bright the star is you're looking at. It has a series of filters, so not only can you find out how bright the star is, but you can also find out how bright it is in blue colors, in red colors, etc. So you're able to take a look at the stars with a great deal of precision in terms of their brightness and the types of light that they put out. And this is particularly interesting because there is a whole group of stars in the sky, usually older stars, which vary in brightness due to their own pulsation. The actual stars, unlike our sun, which is quite steady, there are some small changes in it, but these stars pulsate quite substantially, and we can see it when we look at them in their variation in brightness. So this instrument is used almost extensively now for doing this work of measuring the brightness of stars, and it's the exact companion of a similar type of photometer instrument that we have on our telescope down in Chile in South America.
It's a 24-inch telescope down there, isn't it?
That's right, it's a 24-inch, and so it's very similar in size, a bit larger than this one. And people who are going to be going down to Chile to work on that telescope will often come here beforehand to get an idea of how the equipment works and to understand just what's involved before they begin their expeditions out. So this is our reflector telescope, and I wanted to show it to you now because I think we'll head over to see the big telescope at this point, and it's also a reflecting telescope, and we'll be able to see the mirror in that case, which is quite a bit larger. This one's 19 inches. The one we'll go see now is the 74-inch telescope.
Great, let's head over.
Great.
Well, Doug, here we are at the base of the 74-inch telescope.
This, what we're standing under is 25 tons, Randy, but fortunately it's well supported, so we don't have to look up or worry about things crashing down. But the telescope is completely within inside this dome here. Oftentimes we get an impression the telescope sort of peeks out through the slit in the roof. It's completely inside here. It can move around in any direction, and once we've found the star we want, we can move the dome around to look in just the same direction that we want to point.
Well, that must be quite a feat, moving 25 tons around, and this has a clock drive too, right?
That's right. It's right behind us inside this glass door. Fortunately, the telescope is quite well balanced. The construction is such that the telescope weight is on our side of the mounting. Fortunately, on the other side of the mounting, there's a large counterbalance. That holds the telescope quite delicately in place, so we can move it around quite well. And this is actually where we do the moving around of the telescope. We can move it both in the east-west direction and in the north-south direction. And this mounting has a very special setup, an orientation, so that when we move it in the east-west direction, we move it in the same sense as the Earth's turning.
Oh, I see.
So we can, just in the same way as in some of the other telescopes, by having one motor, we can move the telescope to counter the Earth's rotation. And this wheel here is actually where we move it in the east-west. If we were observing one night and we wanted to get set up on a star, and we knew it's east-west and it's north-south position, we'd start over here with this wheel. Down beneath them are some clamps which release the telescope, so we're able to move it. And this is just like turning a battleship. We can move it around to any direction we want. There are circles above us which give us the direction the telescope is pointing.
And these are set up in increments of hours. There's 24 hours just because, well, I guess the clock drive would cause the telescope to go around once in 24 hours.
That's correct, yeah. It works out just like longitude on the Earth, except as we measure it in hours instead of in degrees.
And we can see it going to the north. Slewing, I guess, is what you're doing.
That's right. If we did have the proper position now in the east-west motion, the next thing we do is we want to change it to get the correct north-south motion. We do that just over here by the console, over here on my left. These controls here allow us to move this north-south. Right now I'm moving the telescope north, so we'll pull the bottom end down to our point of view down here. We can have a closer look at it. Again, the telescope's a reflecting type. It has a large mirror at the bottom, 74 inches across. I think the best way to see it, in a moment or two, we'll go right up and take a look down it and see it directly. But right down at the bottom of the telescope is where the 74-inch mirror is kept. And again, it's like the last one we saw in that it has a hole in the center so that the light will come down and reflect off it, be reflected off a second mirror at the top of the telescope, down through the hole in the primary and into the bottom. And it's down here at the bottom where we'd look in. And if you come up again on a Saturday night to have a look at the scope, you'd be able to come down here at the bottom and take a look right in.
Well, here we are, Doug, underneath the main mirror now. I guess if you were going to put an eyepiece on this thing, right about here is where we'd put it, right below the hole in the mirror.
That's right, Randy. In fact, we're in a very good spot right now. We're not too far off the floor. A lot of times on Saturday nights when we're viewing things, you have to climb up on a ladder quite a distance up to get to where we are underneath the telescope to take a look through. And this is where we look through. In fact, it's probably just out of the field of view, but where we look in is just around the corner up here and above my head. That's where we set up for just general viewing. However, as you can see, there's a lot more underneath the telescope than just the viewing eyepiece. This large triangular box here is actually a camera, and a very special type of camera. It's what we call a spectrograph. It's a camera for taking the light of the star and spreading out all its light into the different colors so that we essentially get the rainbow of a star's colors on a photographic plate. And this spectrograph has several different parts. Most of the time when we're actually doing observing, we use this spectrograph exclusively for taking photos. And usually the stars are faint enough that it takes a long time to get a good photo. For instance, I was observing last night through rather poor conditions, but it took on the order of 2 hours to get enough light on a photograph to get a good photograph.
Is that right?
And in the winter, you can imagine it gets very cold here. And fortunately, we don't have to stay out here and stay by the camera the whole time. Just behind us, there's a warm room, and it's got a TV inside. And in fact, there's a TV camera just in this box up here, so that while you're taking a long time exposure photograph, you can watch your star on TV, drinking a coffee or whatever you like in the warm room, and just doing it in a much more relaxing way than standing out here and peering in. This other eyepiece just beside me here is a viewing eyepiece for using the camera when you're taking a picture of the star with the camera, just to make sure that the star doesn't move out of view. Well, I thought what I'd do is give you a guided tour of what this camera looks like, because it's not like a regular Instamatic camera. It's quite a special thing. Thanks, Steve. Get that in.
Yeah, I've got it.
Here's the area where the light comes down from the telescope. We have a small, actually, it looks like a tiny telescope sitting right up here, and what it does is it spreads out the light, which has been coming down from the mirror in a cone, to more parallel rays, so that the light will come down from the star in a parallel beam. And to do that, the reason we do that is we want it to hit this piece of glass down here in a parallel sense. This piece of glass is a very interesting piece. When you take a look at it, it just looks like a piece of flat glass. In fact, I won't take this one out, but I've got another one just like it that I'll show you right now. It's called a spectrographic grating, and we'll take a look at this one here. It looks like a flat piece of glass, but when you take a very close look at it under a microscope, you can see that there are many, many tiny lines carved into it. In this case, this one has 1,200 lines carved side by side in every millimeter across the surface. And the way these lines work is when light strikes it, it'll be reflected off each bit of light in a slightly different direction, so that you get an entire rainbow of colors coming off. I wonder
I
if
can see the rainbow of colors right now.
maybe we can get I wonder if we can get an image here.
And this diffraction grating acts just like a prism, is that right?
Essentially, yeah, it just creates a whole band of colors. So instead of having a star that looks like a pinpoint, when you photograph it now, you have a star that looks like a streak, but it's a streak of colors, so that you see red on one side and blue on the other side. Now, we don't use color film. We actually use black and white film when we're taking our photographs, but that's okay, because we put beside the color of the star the color from a reference lamp. What we use is an iron arc, as it turns out, and this iron shines quite brightly. We can take a look at that later on. And when it shines, it puts on the colors at specific frequencies, or at very specific colors. And so we know, even though it doesn't look blue, it looks black, we still know where the blue is, and we still know where the green is, and still know where the red is. In fact, I can show you what that photograph looks like. This is what our film looks like, Randy. And you can see it's not like your regular film you put in a 35mm camera. It's actually mounted on glass. And just glass on this side.
And that's the light-sensitive emulsion there.
That's right. And what we do is when we're observing, we load this in the dark into a special plate holder and then bring it out here. And this fits up inside the spectrograph just up in this section up here. And when we finish, what this picture looks like is we have a smear of light across the very center, which is the light from the star, and then just above it and just below it, we have all the different bits of color from this iron arc, which allows us to tell where the blue is, where the green is, and so on.
Oh, I see.
And there's real advantages for doing this, because when you take the spectrum of the star, you can begin to find out some really interesting things about it. For instance, the types of light that you get, the amount of blue and the amount of red, depends on the star's temperature. So by taking one of these spectra, you can immediately tell how hot the star is. You can also tell, to some degree, how far away the star is, because there are certain indications in the light of the star, the spectrum as we call it, about how bright intrinsically the star is. Because some stars look bright only because they're close, whereas some really bright stars may appear faint, but it's only because they're very distant away. And by taking these spectra, we can resolve that ambiguity. We can tell whether a star is close by or whether it's far off. And as well, we can also get an idea of how fast the star is moving. And this is something we do a lot of work in at this particular observatory, because the colors don't stand still. The colors will seem to move a bit towards the blue if the star is coming towards you, or a bit towards the red if the star is going away from you.
So they would move with respect to that iron spectra. If the star was standing still, it would be at this point. If it was moving away, it might move a few millimeters down the slide. And if it was coming towards us, it might move the other way. Is that right?
That's right, exactly. And that's the real use of having the iron there, so that we can tell just how much that shift has taken place.
How fast are these stars moving back and forth?
Well, in some cases, the stars are moving away from the Earth. Sometimes they're coming towards the Earth. And in many cases, there's a whole group of stars where we have two stars orbiting around each other, a bit like the Earth and the Moon, with the Moon going around the Earth. In the case of stars, you can have stars going around stars. And this happens at about 40% of the time. And when you see these stars, and you take a look at their spectra, you find that half the time the star is coming towards you, half the time the star is going away from you, and it works on in a cyclic pattern, so that you can watch how the two stars move around each other. We've done a lot of work at this observatory on that type of observation of seeing how the stars move relative to each other, towards or away from each other.
Well, Doug, you're a graduate student in astronomy at the University of Toronto. What is your main interest in research?
Well, I've actually been using this very telescope and taking these spectra. Randy, my work has been looking at a very interesting star system called Cygnus X1. It's a star system just like the one I've been describing, where you see two stars orbiting around each other, but this particular system has two very unusual features. One is that you can only see the light from one star. The second star, which it's orbiting around, is invisible. There's no light coming from it. And you can infer from looking at these motions, seeing how hard the unseen one is tugging on the one you can see, how heavy the one you can't see really is. It turns out that the star that you can't see in this particular system is a very heavy star. It's about 8 times the mass of our own sun. And there's another very unusual fact about the system, and that is that it's been seen by satellites to emit tremendous amounts of X-rays. X-rays are the same very energetic light that you get zapped through your face when you go to visit a dentist. So putting this all together, it really seems that this system has a very heavy object orbiting around a large but normal star, and it's emitting X-rays. And we think what's going on is that this object you can't see might be one of these black holes that we've heard so much about of late. A star which has collapsed down to a tremendous small size, and although it's quite massive, is very tiny. And so massive that its force of gravity is tremendous. And in fact, that force of gravity is strong enough that it's pulling part of the star that you can see apart, essentially. The outer parts of that star are falling off it and falling down onto the black hole.
Well, Doug, that was fantastic, seeing the 74-inch and all the other telescopes. Thanks very much for taking us on this tour.
My pleasure indeed.
It's true that the public can come up here, isn't it?
That's right, Randy. It's possible to come up and visit the telescope and actually look through it and see some of the great things in the sky, the moon, the planets. We're open on Saturday nights from April till October. And if you want to come up, the best thing to do is phone ahead for a reservation. It's up in Richmond Hill, and the number is 884-2112.
Great. Thanks very much, Doug.
My pleasure, Randy.
And from the David Dunlap Observatory up here in Richmond Hill, this is Randy Attwood saying thank you for watching Astronomy Toronto. And we'll be seeing you next month. Our next show will be a live phone-in show on the last Thursday of September. So that's the last Thursday of September, Astronomy Toronto phone-in. Phone in all your questions that you have on astronomical topics. Until then, bye for now.